June 11, 2019, a new dawn beckoned in Nigeria's parliament. The Ninth Senate was inaugurated. It was a fresh start, new beginnings, and a promise of service. The atmosphere in the Senate chamber on the morning of the inauguration of the Ninth Senate was expectant. Senators-elect were energetic, ready to take on the difficult task of lawmaking for the next 4 years and being warded representatives of their constituents, as well as taking on the unenviable role of holding the other two tiers of government accountable. But first, the senators had to elect their leaders. Senators Ahmed Lawan and Ovie Omoagege were elected as President and Deputy President of the Senate. The Senate got to work immediately and clearly spelled out an ambitious legislative agenda where it targeted several sectors for reform through legislative interventions. The goal of the agenda was to reposition the Senate to carry out its constitutional mandate of legislation, oversight, and representation in an open and transparent manner. The specific objectives of the legislative agenda include institutional needs assessment to be carried out by professionals, reposition the Senate to carry out its constitutional duties of legislation, oversight, and representation in an open and transparent manner, take legislative action to improve national economic conditions, including public finance management, national security architecture, reduce insecurity, poverty, unemployment, and infrastructure deficits, propose and implement a national planning and a reviewed annual budget, make the Ninth Senate the People's Parliament by being sensitive and responsive to the high expectations of their constituents on good governance. The legislative agenda of the Ninth Senate were classified into 11 sectors, namely security, welfare and safety of citizens, youth employment, poverty alleviation, education, healthcare provision, mass housing, gender issues, sports development, economic growth and diversification, infrastructure development, oil and gas sector.
You see, as at that time in the year 2019, there were so many fundamental national crises. Don't forget that we had issues that borders on insecurity, the Boko Haram, the Chibok girls, a lot of issues that time. The borders on insecurity were on. There were issues that borders on restiveness in our tertiary institutions. There were issues that borders on joblessness. There were issues that borders on the hike in the price of fuel. There were even issues that borders on the exchange rates that was astronomically high at that time. So these are main issues that in the course of our study, Nigerians were able to really express their opinions. And they were expecting so much from the Ninth Assembly. They want them to look into it. And the Ninth Assembly, in their principles of trying to implement the agenda, and I believe that to achieve all these aspirations, they need to work closely with the executive.
Cognizant of the damaging effect of persistent conflict with the executive and the resultant impact on legislative activities, the Ninth Assembly, under the leadership of Senator Ahmed Lawan, adopted a friendly but professional approach to executive-legislative relations with focus on constructive engagement and decision-making for the interest of Nigerians.
Well, this is all boiled down on good leadership. Senator Ahmed Lawan, who is the current president of the Senate, really did very well in administering the Senate. And we have a lot of matured people. Virtually all of us are matured and responsible people who have held a position before either governors or ministers or senators. So we tend to support him because he's one of us that we voted him to be our Senate president, based on the recommendations of Mr. President and other party elders. So we had to support him, to give him the encouragement to work as a team. There are definitely ups and downs within the running of the Senate, but still we have managed to hold the House together.
Unfortunately, the public has often misunderstood this position and hastily and unfairly termed the Assembly a rubber stamp to the executive.
People come at the time you are supposed to be taking them through rigorous confirmation exercise, grueling exercise, as some members of public will call it. You simply ask them to take a bow and leave. That's one of the things, one of the practices that are most criticized. Again, there are people who believe that whatever the executive brings, whatever requests, the parliament grants. And there are those who also feel that, even with respect to budget, it's garbage in, garbage out. But is it exactly so? My answer will be no. When it comes to appointments and screening and confirmation of such appointments made by the president.
Is that rubber stamping? Is that just putting your signature on it, whether it's right or wrong? There were instances where, in the course of oversight, they had both rep members and senate members, they had issues. As an insider, by virtue of my position here, I know on several occasions the Ministry of Finance and the Senate leadership, they are not always on terms. But perhaps what we were expecting, people that held the opinion that it was a rubber stamp Senate, what they were expecting was to see them fight in the public. So when they did not fight in the public, whatever they bring, they approve.
The approach of the Ninth Senate has resulted in some of the most significant legislative achievements since 1999.
So much. We have so many impactful and landmark bills that the Ninth Senate passed, which have direct impact on Nigerians. I will summarize just very few. We have Electoral Act Amendment. We have PIA, which was PIB before, but now PIA, there is an act already. We also have devolution of power, that's unbundling of power to states. We also have now independent candidature that we just passed, hoping that Mr. President will sign it into law. So coming to Electoral Act Amendment Bill, which of course you have seen that now INEC has the right to report electronically results from different polling units to ward level, to local government level, to constituency level, to their portal, where every indigenous or even people outside this country will have access to INEC results. And that has reduced drastically the electoral violence, the electoral fraud, and so many encumbrances we normally witness during the electioneering process. So that has strengthened the process of electioneering in Nigeria and also strengthened the powers of INEC while maintaining proper democracy in the country where the votes count. Unlike in the past where people carry ballot boxes, hire thugs to scatter polling units. Now, no matter how you want to, destroy the voting process in each polling unit and ward, they already have their records, and that will not, invalidate any, official result from the polling units and ward level.
Those in favor say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it.
In lawmaking, the Assembly has introduced and successfully passed critical legislations meant to reform and promote the economy and improve transparency in government processes. In the agenda, the Ninth Senate resolved to return Nigeria to the January to December budget cycle. Under the Ninth National Assembly in general, the budget cycle became consistent as it followed the budget cycle of the January to December calendar. The predictability of the budget cycle brought by the commitment of the Ninth National Assembly to pass the Appropriation Act in a timely manner supported strategic corporate planning, operations, monitoring, and evaluation, aside from preventing disruptions in project execution.
The interpretation of that particular agenda design was to return the country back to a predictable January to December budget cycle, in which case by January 1 of any year, the country has a budget, has a proposal as to how much it will spend, how it will spend it. And this will enable all stakeholders, investors, other players in the economy, including even the MDAs themselves, to know what they want to do. And this means that from January, you can plan from that January up to December as to what you want to do. So this was accomplished because if you look all the budget 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, they were passed latest by the third week of December of every year.
The Ninth Senate passed some key legislations intended to enable greater economic growth and development of a country. They include Company and Allied Matters Act, CAMA, the Business Facilitation Miscellaneous Provisions Act, Finance Acts. Its Committee on Finance also held several public hearings and engagements with heads of federal government ministries, departments and agencies to understand the source of revenue leakages in the country and strategize on ways of blocking them.
We found out that each year the executive presents their appropriation bill before the National Assembly. Funding is always a challenge, especially funding accruing, independent revenue accruing to the federal government. It has always been a challenge. And we felt that who are to bring in this money? These are agencies of the government. And we looked at how do we address this issue. We found out that it's the sole responsibility of the Finance Committee to embark on this assignment to ensure, among other things, that what belongs to the federal government goes to the federal government. In the first year, the first appropriation that we got, government only projects about 500 billion independent revenue. And we found out that at the end of the year, we got less than 300 billion naira with over 600 agencies of the federal government. And we said this cannot work. So we embark on this investigative hearing to know what is really the issue. Where are these revenue? The second year, government budgeted 800 billion. And we ended up realizing 1.4 trillion naira. That is almost doubled the amount that was budgeted by the federal government from the first assignment. And what we discovered is that many of these revenue-generating agencies are fond of diversion or diverting this revenue of the government under frivolous expenditure within that agencies. Expenditures that are not in conformity with the laws of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. They hide under fixed wages and salaries that are not in line with salaries and wages commission as set up by the federal government. And all others expenditure. So my committee embarked on this assignment, and so many agencies we discovered, and we instructed that they should start paying back into the coffers of the government. Lo and behold, a lot of these agencies start paying, and all of these leakages, discriminate expenditure was stopped. And before we know it, we jumped from 800 to 1.4 trillion, and from 1.4 trillion to about 2.3 trillion naira. Improving federal government contribution to the revenue profile of the government and of the budget. This year, I know we're in the region of about 2.83 trillion as independent revenue.
The Senate Committee on Public Accounts is unarguably one of the most important committees with a huge task of ensuring probity and transparency in the finance of government ministries, departments, and agencies. The committee did an excellent work of beaming its searchlight on the books of the MDAs through analyzing queries from the yearly Auditor General's reports.
Today, the Senate has passed the bill, sponsored by me and my chairman, Senator Adeja, for the implementation of the decisions of the National Assembly over Attorney General's reports. Based on our findings, the 2015 report that we sent to the executive, our findings, we had expected that they were going to implement our recommendations, particularly where infractions were committed, and we're asking for refunds of money so charged to public funds to be refunded by the officer that committed the fraud or the infraction. Secondly, according to prescriptions in financial regulation, we had actually mentioned too that some of these persons should be relieved of their appointments.
Oil and gas sector. For over 3 decades, crude oil has been the driving force behind the Nigerian economy, accounting for about 90% of the country's export earnings. This factor invariably made it necessary for the federal government to focus on this sector by attempting to create an all-encompassing petroleum industry law. However, the petroleum industry bill languished in the National Assembly for over a decade, as previous assemblies failed to pass this critical piece of legislation. But the 9th Assembly broke the jinx and passed the Petroleum Industry Bill, which has been adjudged as revolutionary and a significant win for the petroleum industry and the country as a whole, as it sends a strong message to international investors. The act seeks to boost investor confidence in Nigeria's petroleum industry while increasing job prospects for the host communities. The 9th Senate passed another critical bill in the oil and gas sector called the Deep Offshore Inland Basin Production Sharing Contract Amendment Act 2019. This legislation was enacted in 1993 to grant specific incentives to oil companies operating in the deep offshore and inland basin area without adjusting the revenue accruable to the Federation over the years, despite the fluctuating increase in the price of crude oil beyond $20 per barrel. This called for the amendment to increase Nigeria's earnings from the oil and gas industry and ultimately increase the federal government's revenue. The amendment also provides for a combination of a flat royalty rate for deep offshore and inland basins and change in the price of crude, gas, and condensate. Health is one of the items listed in the legislative agenda of the 9th Senate, and lawmakers resolved to provide robust legislations to foster reforms in the health sector. The 9th Senate repealed the National Health Insurance Scheme Act 2004, which it felt was restrictive in its provisions, and many Nigerians were not covered under the health insurance scheme, especially those in the informal sector of the economy. This led to the enactment of the National Health Insurance Authority Act, which appears more holistic in promoting, regulating, and integrating health insurance schemes and establishing universal health coverage for all Nigerians.
We cannot achieve quality healthcare, or what we call universal health coverage, where everybody is able to access the health it requires in the necessary quality without the hardship of payment at the point of need, without adequate funding. And what we know is that for us to be able to achieve that universal coverage, the barrier to funding must be removed. We know Nigeria has a lot of poor people and vulnerable groups. And except these people that are poor and vulnerable are covered in one way or the other for the health care, we can't achieve universal health coverage.
One can say with certainty that electoral reform was one of the most anticipated reforms of the 9th Senate, and one which the upper chamber devoted huge time and resources to. It was also a series of legislative activities which Nigerians observed with keen interest. The importance of electoral reform stemmed from the credibility crisis of Nigerian elections over the years, even those preceding the 1999 elections, which caused the electorate to lose hope in the country's elections. However, to solve these crises prompted the call for electoral reforms from different stakeholders. The Ninth National Assembly ensured the passage of the 2022 Electoral Act, which has charted a new course in the electoral process in Nigeria. Under the new act, there are clear procedures and modalities for conduct of congresses or primaries by political parties. Secondly, the introduction of electronic transmission of election results in accordance with the procedure determined by the Commission is another novel innovation under the new act. This has been an applauded innovation in the area of time management during election and hitch-free transmission of results. It has been said to also enhance the credibility of elections, as there is now little room for election result alteration, as was the practice in the past.
Well, I could say the Electoral Act is passed to our committee when the bill came to the floor of the Senate, being we are the committee in charge of INEC, or electoral matters. So the bill was passed to our committee. What we did, it took us 2 years in the process, honestly. And at the end of the day, we said that no, we're not even only amending, we are repealing most areas and re-enacting another electoral, which would be 2022 Electoral Act. Because otherwise, instead of quoting amendment in 2010, amendment in 2019, we said no, let us have a fresh bill so that it will be easier for the lawyers and the courts and people to understand how it is. We started by, in our committee, we met and going through the bill. We got input from INEC themselves. We got input from many stakeholders, whereby parties just nominate their own candidate, even if they do primaries at local government level or at state level or at constituency level. You find that the party headquarters in Abuja, all the parties, they just change the name, they put who they want to put. So we said, no, we have to stop that, because we said, well, INEC shall supervise the primaries of every party in their where they are holding primaries. And that helped a lot, because it sanitized the system, that there is somebody supervising the government, the party primaries. Otherwise, you find that in some places, parties can hold 2 primaries at different locations because of the party wants some few candidates, another candidate is not favored by the party, so he also organizes his own primaries.
But the journey to the passage of the electoral bill was not an easy one. It was intense, fraught with tension over several clauses, notably electronic transmission of results and mode of primaries. A division was called for the first time in the 9th Senate during voting on the Electoral Act.
There was issue when we said that the issue of electronic voting, electronic transfer of votes, and so on. And some of people raised the point that we do not have network services in virtually every location, so we cannot do electronic voting. But we end up being a little bit smarter, that the voting can be done with agents of the parties, and they can sign the results. The security also would sign and accept the result. And when the result sheet is completed, then they will take a picture of the result sheet and then post it down to the headquarters for compilation of the result. That is a bit better, because when you post a picture, they will not alter that picture for you. But if you are sending numbers, like if I vote and I'm number 102, then the next person will be 102. So there will be continuous transmitting of those results. And we had fear that if you continue to transmit results during voting, it means the result can be hacked before during the voting, or on transit to the voting, or even at the end of where they receive the results. So we said, no. We cannot. We have not gone that well, technically, we have not gone to that level. Even in U.S. last election of Trump and Biden, you find that there were problems. There was issue of alteration or accusation that the results were tampered or hijacked or manipulated electronically from other areas. So we said, no, at least technologically we are not that advanced. We should try to go to this system. So that is how INEC did. And we did a model test on the machine, like the Edo election and the Ondo Ekiti election. We all did that thing, and people, Nigerians, love it. But now we did it during the 20th regional election. We had problem with beavers, and we started also problem with the card readers.
Well, I believe it was just the high point of democracy in action. And of course, our laws, the standing order of the Senate allows for a division when people feel very strongly about it. And we agreed we should go for a division because we know at the end of the day we're going to carry the day because we are speaking about facts. You see, laws are meant to serve people. People are not meant to serve law. And like I said, to the glory of God today, with the benefit of hindsight, with the Electoral Act that has now been tested through the 2023 election, it was obvious that we were right about so many things that went into that Electoral Act. And one thing I want to say very clearly is that, you see, people thought the electronic transmission of result was something to be done online, real time. That was the difference. And it was not possible for you to do an electronic transmission of result from polling unit online, real time. It's not possible. So what do? We said we're going to introduce electronic devices or technology to guide the electoral process. And that was why initially the clause that was provided was that the commission may transmit electronic result. And we said, no, we have to put a provisor. And I remember then the amendment I brought was saying that if it was adjudged that the coverage, the network coverage is adjudged to be adequate and secured. Because those are two issues that need to be taken into consideration.
In the same vein, the Ninth Senate embarked on judicial reform, passing critical legislations like the Administration of Criminal Justice Reform Criminal Code Act Amendment Bill 2019. The administration of criminal justice is aimed at providing penalties for offenses and deterrence, restoration, rehabilitation, and restoration of offenders. Consequently, the bill seeks to review existing laws to bring them into conformity with best practices. The Ninth Senate also passed the Firearms Act Amendment Bill 2021, geared towards control of illicit influx of firearms into the country. It also enacted the Witness Protection and Management Bill 2022.
It was a sector that we felt that definitely needed a lot of legislative intervention. Unfortunately, our judicial officers are people who would rather prefer to operate without being seen or without being heard. They don't carry placards, they don't protest, they don't write petitions, they don't give ultimatum, with respect to wanting to have their conditions of service improved, for instance. So we felt that there was a need to carry out reforms within the judicial sector that would ensure not only the independence of the judiciary as an arm of government, but an independence that would find expression also in even how they handle their finances, which I would call the fiscal or financial independence of the judiciary. And we try to put some bills in place in this regard. Some required constitutional amendments, and we had to put in bills aimed at alteration of the 1999 Constitution as amended. And we were able to succeed in some areas, while in some other areas it is not yet a whole, and it's still work in progress. But substantially, we succeeded in trying to ensure that the judiciary itself, through the National Judicial Council, will be able to access its own funding.
The Ninth Senate followed the paths of previous assemblies by embarking on several constitutional alterations covering different sectors of the society. They ranged from local government reforms, governance, economy, security, legislative-executive relations, food security, citizenship, and legislative reforms. It embarked on this endeavor by collaborating with the House of Representatives. The Ninth National Assembly eventually passed 44 constitutional amendment bills on March 2022 and transmitted 37 bills which met the requirement of the provision of Section 9, subsection 2 of the Constitution to the President for assent. The 37 bills had been considered by 27 state houses of assembly and approved by at least 24 state assemblies as required by law.
Now states can generate their own power and transmit, which they didn't have before. It was an exclusive list, or now it's a concurrent list. And that has given the states the platform and the opportunity to generate their own power and transmit their own power. What that means is that it will open up our communities for investment, it will open up competition in the business, it will also help the small businesses to grow, because actually it is the small businesses that oil the economy of any country. So with having sufficient power supply in states will obviously help in the management of especially the downtrodden and also through us up to prosperity. So in that aspect, I think the National Assembly did well by ensuring that they take the electricity from exclusive list to concurrent list. Then the issue of independent candidature. We have seen that we don't have internal democracy in political parties. So independent candidature will help, people who don't have access to political parties or who don't want to belong to any political party to also run an election and meet up their aspirations. And that will strengthen the political system and the political landscape of this country.
It has also made a lot of impact, and that is the Constitution, the constitutional amendment. We in the Ninth Assembly had walked through the years to ensure that the Constitution was amended. The 1999 Constitution was amended, and that also has a lot of impact in our governance, because after all, legislation is about promoting good governance.
As to the bill requesting for the separation of the office of the Attorney General from that of the Minister of Justice, this passed. And I believe that this is something that is going to bring a lot of difference, positive difference and positive impact in the manner of administration of justice. The issue of local government autonomy is one that we cannot run away from. Unfortunately, this did not pass during the life of the Ninth Assembly. And this will not be because we didn't want it to go. It will be because a lot of the stakeholders thought differently. Ensuring that we are able to attain whatever we want to achieve through constitutional amendment is something that goes beyond one chamber alone. If that is the thinking in the red chamber, for instance, it must be aligned with the thinking in the green chamber. In other words, you must get the concurrence of the two chambers to pass it. And it goes beyond that for constitutional amendment. You now will need to get the concurrence of 2/3 of the state houses of assembly in ensuring that, such a bill see the light of the day before it can be transmitted to the President and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces for his own assent. Unfortunately, the local government autonomy bill did not pass. And for us, we're not giving up on it. By the grace of God, a lot of us are back, in the 10th Senate. And I'm sure a lot of the newly elected senators and members of the House of Representatives also feel so strongly about this. So I see us going back, to, revisit, such a critical bill. Because without local government autonomy, our democracy cannot really attain the much desired growth that we need at the grassroots level.
The Ninth Senate did not restrict itself to enacting laws, but also intervened in burning national issues. An example is its response to the COVID-19 pandemic.
The Senate committees, the 2 committees of the Senate, and indeed the House of Reps, the 5 committees, the National Assembly, we came together and we did a proactive oversight on the relevant agencies that we thought, and we were right, that if COVID will come to Nigeria, because there was no COVID in Nigeria, it has to be imported. And our assessment was that the importation will come either through our airport or seaport, because those are places where most people that are mobile come to. That's why we do recognize we have land border, but as at that time, we know that our land borders, the countries that are neighboring to us, had not got the COVID. So we took a preemptive oversight visit to Abuja and Lagos Airport, as well as Apapa, Tinka Island Seaport, to assess their preparedness, their level of personnel and equipment, and the necessary supplies for them to detect cases of COVID. And through that, we were able to identify the gaps, and we gave necessary advice and directive for these places to be equipped, to be provided with necessary manpower. So that helps towards our preparing to identify the first case. You will see that the first case, when it came in, it was very easy to track the person from Ogun State back to Lagos. Our intervention in terms of getting isolation center ready was impactful, because it saves lives. Because without that Gwagwalada Isolation Center then, even before National Hospital now had, the initial cases wouldn't have had places to go. And it was rapidly put together, including putting ventilators and so on there. Because as at that time, less understanding were available as regards the epidemiology of the disease.
It also responded to the security challenges in the country by way of appropriating funds for the Nigerian military, visiting troops in the theaters of command, and making several recommendations to the executive on security matters.
I would say yes, we were very, very responsive. And of course, we knew that by the nature of the mandate given to us, we are bound to bring complaints from our constituents as their representative. And that's why in our order paper, as a permanent, there is always room for point of order in terms of either, issues of matters of urgent national importance. That was why it's also in our, in our order, standing, order. So we were very responsive, because when my senatorial district came under bandit attack, several times I stood up to give a recount of what happened in my senatorial district. And I would say, using my own senatorial district, Niger North, as an example, it actually did the magic. Because immediately you come out to speak, giving to Nigerians that this is what is happening in your senatorial district. In the case that I did, Mariga local government was attacked several times. Kontagora, suburb, were also part of it. Wushishi, Magama, and Mashegu local government. And in 1 or 2 instances also in Borgu local government. We came out and spoke, and it gave direction to the military authorities, the security authorities, and of course, Mr. President also, to turn his attention to those areas. From day one, the Senate was not totally supportive. It was a mixed grill. And the voices of those who are opposed to it was more. Because what happened is, if I remember, we said, okay, let's give benefit of doubt to the effect that there are positive side of this policy. But we need to get more clarifications. And if you remember the first time we debated that issue, our recommendation was that if you are going to do it, do not crowd it in the time frame you have given. Extend it to June to allow enough time for implementation and sensitization, and that they should increase sensitization, enlightenment, and education of Nigerians through the various media outlets so that Nigerians know how all of this process of the policy is going to play out and how they are going to participate and how it is going to impact on them.
Infrastructural development was also a major focus of the 9th Assembly.
The support to the Institute from the 9th Senate has been very, very, very remarkable. And one, you appreciate this when you look at it from the point of the fact that the leadership of the Institute itself, at least the policymakers, they are the parliamentarians. In other words, the chairman of our governing council is the Senate President. The alternate chairman is the Speaker. So I can't take any major decision, for instance, without their support, without their approval. So when I roll out what we have achieved in the last 4 years, for instance, the kudos goes to the 9th Senate and 9th House of Representatives, especially the leadership.
Opposition lawmakers make up a critical part of the legislature, sometimes providing an avenue for alternative views. Senators in the 9th Assembly expressed their experiences from belonging to the opposition political parties.
No, on the contrary, I think it was very liberating. And I will put it this way. You're more, you can express yourself when you're an opposition senator. You can challenge government policies that you feel are not in the interest of the public without the fear of not towing the party line. So those who are in the opposition, like me, feel far more liberated, I'm telling you, because I've been on both sides. And I know what it used to be like when we were also in the government side, when I was in PDP, when PDP was in charge. So it was always very difficult to oppose PDP. And anytime we did it, a lot of people will come behind and say, why are you fighting your party? Why is PDP being the opposition to PDP? All that type of thing. It's even far more vicious within the APC today than it was in PDP.
I will not probably say that opposition played its full role in this 9th Assembly. In as much as some of us had our individual voices, but it did not accumulate into a very strong opposition voice for PDP, as the case may be, which is the main opposition party in Nigeria. I feel strongly that the party itself should have played a more strong force in opposition. But castigating government does not mean that you are playing your role. When you see what government has done and done well, you don't need to oppose it. But when the government is not in tandem with the yearnings and aspirations of Nigerians, that is where the opposition comes in, and that's where I think that the PDP should have played a more role in being an opposition party.
While the 9th Senate has come to an end, the memories of the last 4 years will live on in the minds of the legislators.
I would rather say there's not a particular moment, but rather several to the extent that I was able, working with the Senate President, to gain the trust of my colleagues in working with them, in the past 4 years. This institution is a very, very special place, a place where you have very, very accomplished men and women, former governors, former captains of industry, It's an institution made up of men, not boys. So when you're in the leadership here, you first among equals, or second among equals. You operate, rightfully so, on the premise that all of us, all 109 of us, pursuant to Section 50, Subsection 1A of the Constitution, are all qualified to serve as Senate President and Deputy Senate President. So it's only a privilege given to you by the remaining 108 to serve. And to the extent that I was able, working with the Senate President, to gain the trust of my colleagues, and survived for 4 years without any incident, a place where ordinarily you have banana peels. I think it's very, very rewarding.
Well, I was surprised when they were naming committees, and when they mentioned INEC, they called my name, and I had a vision in myself that we need to amend the Electoral Act because of all the process we went through during the last elections. There were a lot of mistakes or deliberate attempt to make the election not fair, not credible. And yet, and then we have to go like that because we don't have the law to threaten those mistakes. So what we did, I was surprised when my name was mentioned as chairman on INEC committee. I was really happy, and I felt that I should make an input in that, and of which I thank God we did.
Let me say that the best moment, I will say, was when we passed, was on the day that I insisted that a rule of the Senate must be used. That is the rule for division that gave birth to the electoral reform that actually cascaded into the electronic transmission in the Electoral Act. Because I remember that the Senate President was passing everything by voice vote, and actually by voice vote passed that there should be no electronic transmission. And I got up as minority leader and invoked the section of our rules that talks about division.
Is my bill on Federal University of Education, Kwantagora. Is a legacy. And given the scale of development of my senatorial district, having that university is something I will live to cherish for the rest of my life, because it directly impacts on the people that have given me the opportunity to come to this level to represent them. Because education is the bedrock of all development. And the essence of sponsoring that bill was to actually provide access to quality teacher education so that all the senatorial district wards, I have 87 wards, should be able to, over time, have sufficient number of qualified teachers who are able to access that university to have various levels of education and to go back and teach their children at that level so that those children can also come out and compete in the nation through the knowledge they are going to acquire in the various universities.
For these lawmakers, there were many lessons learnt in the 9th Assembly that were as poignant as they were eye-opening.
The lesson learned is, one, you gain more by working cooperatively with your colleagues and with the executive arm. For those of us who were here in the 8th Senate, we couldn't achieve much. We achieved little or nothing because of the constant infighting between the executive and the legislative arm. But in the 9th Senate, we worked as brothers and as colleagues. We watched each other's back at all times. It was always okay. This is my interest. I need that interest protected. I need to have the president sign and sign on time. I need your cooperation here. And it worked, So I go back home, with my head high, because I achieved basically everything I wanted to achieve here in the National Assembly.
The major challenges we had is we were too bold enough to handle controversial bills. You remember the PIB, which for years, I've been in the Senate for the last 16 years. And I know the 6th, 7th, and 8th Senate, we all struggled to see how we can pass the PIB. It couldn't work because there's so much interest in it. So we said, no. Then when the time comes up in the 9th Senate, the Senator Ahmed Lawan has to be praised for his affirmative on getting the bill passed.
It's a learning process. It continues. I have seen that the Senate, of course, is the engine of power to the people. That is where democracy is being x-rayed and also protected. Because when you protect the interests of the people, you are protecting the livelihood of the people. You are at least upholding to the dividends of democracy.
As the curtains draws for the 9th Assembly, and recalling the giant strides made by the 9th Senate, the senators of the Assembly indeed can boast of the words of Julius Caesar: "They came, they saw, and they conquered."